Hello and welcome. I'm Bearded Halfling, and welcome to what is the first episode of hopefully a few, the Halflings Armoury, where I go over real historical weapons for your fantasy worlds. Actually, before we start, I'm just going to get changed. That's alright. I won't be. Just stay there. Stay there. I won't be a minute. Right. There we go. Much better. And I'm sure none of you will be surprised to know I own this entire outfit in real life. But with no further ado, let us introduce the star of today's show, the Bardiche, the true medieval two-handed battle axe and the only weapon that I call Daddy. The Bardiche is the natural evolution to the earlier Dane axe, where essentially a bunch of medieval people went, I like this, but what happens if I made it more axe? The Bardiche first appears in art in around the mid-13th century, but it is likely it was used before then. It was used throughout Europe until about the 15th century, where it became less popular in the West, but remained popular in both North and Eastern Europe. The shaft of the Bardiche was around 5 foot long, so as far as polearms go, it's on the shorter end, but it more than makes up for that with this massive axe head on top. In fact, the Bardiche's head was so large, at its bottom end, it would need to, and I'm quoting here, embrace the shaft. This second attachment varied between simply being placed against the shaft, fastened to it, or having its own independent socket, essentially turning the Bardiche into a two-socketed weapon. Unlike the earlier Dane axe, the tip of the Bardiche was fashioned into a spike, meaning the weapon could be swung overhead or diagonally, as well as being thrust into an opponent. Oh man, I feel like I'm going to get demonetized for the amount of times I said shaft, thrusting, and head in that sentence. This design created a surprisingly versatile weapon. With one hand being protected by the blade of the weapon, you could effectively parry and block your opponent's attacks before switching into a more offensive stance and swinging into your opponent, crushing armor, flesh, and cutting people in two. Although long-bladed weapons are not perfect for cutting through armor, the sheer weight of the Bardiche more than made up for that fact, with most armour of the period simply not being able to stand out against such a blow. During and after the 15th century, the Bardiche remained in service in Eastern Europe and was particularly famous for use by the Streltsy, Russian gunner units, who would use the Bardiche as a gun stand for their arquebuses. Because simply holding up a sign saying I have massive balls was not enough for the Streltsy. Now, with a bit of the history explained, let's go into how these weapons would look in a fantasy world and a fantasy setting. We're going to be sticking this mostly to the earlier period of use of the Bardiche, trying to stick into that medieval fantasy setting in which most people will find themselves and their D&D campaigns set in. Although, if you do want to have an artificer with an arquebus resting it on a Bardiche, you absolutely do so. It's very, very cool. As we know, every barbarian worth their salt needs a battle axe, and personally, I'd much rather see the Bardiche than the classic two-handed battle axes that's really portrayed in fantasy at the moment. I don't know about you, but this massive axe looks way cooler than the double-headed axe. And whilst I know historical importance and realism, as well as practicality, is not everyone's cup of tea in fantasy settings, it does go without saying that the double-headed battle axes are both historically inaccurate and incredibly hard and difficult to use. Frankly, every single double-headed battle axe would be improved with the removal of one of its heads. But if you still want that weight of the attack, I definitely recommend going with the Bardiche instead. I mean, look at this. Look at this weapon. And tell me that this doesn't look as cool as a double-headed axe. I don't know, it might just be me. But in practical use, there are two main reasons that I see why someone would pick up a Bardiche in a fantasy setting over any other type of weapon. The first one, being personal to me, are short braces. So the two-handed Bardiche is a perfect weapon for being able to parry against attacks coming from above while still being able to put up a threat with a thrusting attack before swinging into an opponent's chest or head using the length of the weapon as an advantage. Also, quick side note, the heavy weapon rule, that's in D&D 5e, should be completely ignored and should not exist. This is just, I might talk about this in a different video, but the heavy rule is just dumb, and if you use it, you're a dumb person. But anyway, minor rant aside, we all know dwarves love their axes, and I'd love to see a battalion of dwarven axemen armed with the Bardiche going into battle. The second major advantage that I see to the use of the Bardiche in a fantasy setting is monster hunting. Now, most monsters in D&D are rather big, meaning that smaller weapons like daggers, arrows, even swords, even if you connect with a monster, aren't going to be able to do enough damage to keep that monster down. And especially those lower tier large monsters like ogres and trolls are going to shrug off most smaller weapons and be able to keep on fighting. A Bardiche, however, has the weight to both cut through the tough skin of an ogre or a troll and has a large enough blade to do major internal damage once it is through. Similarly, using the spike of the Bardiche to be able to fend off a monster and keep it at arm's length before moving in and dealing a death blow is a massive advantage that the Bardiche has over almost every other weapon of the period. And although weapons like the halberd are longer, the smaller head does mean that once you do connect with a swinging blow, it will do less damage when compared to a Bardiche. In my own fantasy world of Sorrento, the Bardiche is commonly used in the Duchy of Barret. Barret has a massive troll problem, with many trolls lurking in the forests and swamps of the area, and many men-at-arms who patrol the roads will have men equipped with Bardiches to be able to deal death blows even to things like trolls, with some units such as the Greenway Guard and the Wolf River Patrol even using enchanted flaming Bardiches to be able to deal that death blow even better and more efficiently. Whilst men-at-arms with spears, crossbows and bows are able to keep patrol at arm's length to allow the Bardiche user to land the finishing blow. As for stats, well, most fantasy games will have a two-handed axe that you'll be able to just use the Bardiche as. And so, in the case of D&D 5e, you'll need to get your d12s ready to deal that hefty bit of damage for any fighter or barbarian who picks it up. But yeah, that's the Bardiche in a nutshell. I'm hoping to make these Halfling Armoury updates fairly regularly, so as always, if this is the type of thing you're interested in, please do subscribe so you don't miss out on any episodes. Additionally, if I've convinced you that the Bardiche is a cool weapon to use, please let me know and tell me what character will be using it. But also, I want to know what weapons you want to hear about, either fantasy or historical weapons to cover in a future episode. But for now, I've been the Bearded Halfling, and bye.